Senator, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Slaughter, just while the mic's hot over there, what percentage of U.S. exports are in the service sector?
I'm going to do the numbers in my head. I think about a third of U.S. exports today total are services as opposed to shipments of goods.
And traditionally, the bank is, can you just give me your take on why you think the XM Bank does not support more service sector businesses?
It's a good question. I think part of it is the expansion in services trade has been pretty dramatic in recent years. It's partly because I think what impedes flow of services across borders hasn't been the traditional border barriers of governments, of tariffs and quotas and things like that. It's been natural barriers, communication and technology barriers. But with the IT revolution, the ability to transact a lot of services around the world has gone up a lot. So one of the big educational industries that we run a trade surplus in is my line of work, which is educational services. So the positive trade balance in services the U.S. has had has grown a lot in recent years, and I think that's probably part of the reason that there hasn't been as much of an awareness both of the bank itself and of a lot of services businesses of that possible connection.
Any idea in terms of how they're going to calculate content with service-type businesses, or how you would try to do that?
No, and I don't say that to be coy. I think that's part of the reason I think the effort to measure content domestic versus non-U.S. for any industry is hard. It's even harder for services. And so I think, and to come back to some of these conversations, when you're thinking about cost of goods sold, you're thinking of SG&A expenses, it's very hard even for manufacturing companies to know how to allocate those things.
Now, Ms. Lee, if I can come back to you just for a second. The XM Bank's mission is to support American jobs, not just manufacturing jobs. Is that your understanding as well? And services certainly would be, I would imagine, a big part of jobs in the United States. Chairman had some questions before when we were looking at what goes into it. And we look at, if there's not somebody out there, if they don't know about the product, obviously they're not going to be selling a whole lot of them. Would you agree or disagree that if I am using a marketing firm and aspects of that for a particular product that's just going to be coming off the line, would that be considered, in your view, something that we could add into content?
That wouldn't be a direct cost of production, no.
But I understand it's not a direct cost of production. Would you be able to, in terms of XM Bank, would you say we should be including that in production? I mean, as part of content?
Our preference for the calculation of content would be that it include only the direct costs of production. One of the concerns we have is the apportionment of indirect costs, whether it's advertising or brand name or CEO pay or overhead, across many different products, that there is a potential for manipulation of those numbers, and that it's less straightforward for the average American, the average person, the common sense interpretation of where a product is made. I think they're looking at the production costs.
Sure. My colleague, Mr. Scott, had talked before about unemployment and the staggeringly high number of Americans that are out of work right now, and even more those that are underemployed right now. And I certainly agree, and I can honestly tell you that I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Probably the number one thing that we're trying to address here in the Congress is how do we jumpstart our economy? How do we create more jobs and put more Americans back to work? And certainly, Mr. Hardy, your comments earlier about the content, a specific company, if they lowered that content, that actually might be able to increase exports simply because they're going to be able to put more of those people back to work, and that individual business would be able to hire more people in, Main Street, USA, whatever it may be. What do you think? If you had to pick a number out there for content, what would be the ideal number? We've got Germany at 50%, and we're looking at something a lot higher than that. What would you determine would be best in order to create more jobs?
In a statement for the record that we have submitted earlier to the subcommittee with regard to the reauthorization, we had proposed moving from 85 to 70. And the reason for that was that, again, when we held discussions with our own companies, which are the larger exporters in the United States, that we found that the overwhelming number of product lines were between those two numbers. It was quite startling in that sense, that by the product lines, the content levels are at that level because of competitiveness. And these companies, obviously, as pursuing the global market. The competitiveness is absolutely essential. It's the core of what they're doing. So once they have accomplished that, and this was the additional sort of striking thing, is they were all below the 85, which clearly meant that they were not adjusting their content in order to ensure financing. So the content levels are a reflection of what it takes to be competitive, which meant that if you drop that content level from 85 to 70, suddenly all of those product lines would become fully competitive. The chairman actually referenced the air tractor example, who air tractor testified earlier. Air tractor, as he said, there's a co-financing arrangement with the Canadians. Air tractor purchased their aircraft engines from Canada. If Canada had the same content level, same content requirements that USXM had, they would not be able to undertake a co-financing, because the Canadians have reached out and said, we will deem any non-US content to be Canadian content, even though there are contents from products, from components from other countries that are part of those Canadian engines. That's the sort of dilemma that exists, that other ECAs are bending over backwards actually to make these deals happen because of the restrictiveness of U.S. content levels.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. My time's expired, Mr.